When the Atlanta Hawks landed the #1 pick in the NBA draft lottery, hitting on just a 3% chance of getting the top selection, this of course after coming off a disappointing season in which they finished 10th in the Eastern Conference and were blown out by the Chicago Bulls in the play-in tournament, the thought was this was exactly what the Hawks needed to jumpstart their push to try and continue to win now and build around Trae Young and Dejounte Murray. But throughout the season, as well as leading up to the draft lottery, rumors were swirling around the league that the Hawks, whether it be during the season or in the offseason, that one of Trae Young or Dejounte Murray would be moved to try and acquire future assets that they could use to retool their roster. But once they got the #1 pick, it appeared, for a little bit anyway, that sentiment had changed. And that with the #1 pick adding that talent to their roster, they could still potentially make this work and try and get back to the Eastern Conference Finals that we had seen them do just 3 years ago. Keep both Trae Young and Dejounte Murray, also with the #1 pick, presumably Alex Sarr, the young 19-year-old big man out of France, and try and keep winning now. But you now have some speculating that the Hawks, because they now have the #1 pick, they might just trade both Trae Young and Dejounte Murray, blow it up, and rebuild around whoever they select with the #1 pick. And while in theory it sounds like a good idea, as it's pretty clear the Hawks team as they currently are constructed do not work, and it's better to tear it down now before Trae and Dejounte's trade value depreciates over time, there's actually a bigger reason why the Hawks would be foolish to take this approach in trading both of their star players, and I'll explain why in this video. Before we get into the rest of the video though, a quick shout out to the sponsor of this one, OddsJam. And look, I know for the most part sports betting apps are kind of all the same, but OddsJam is very unique in that they are the top choice for data-driven sports betting, tracking over 260 sports books in real time. With OddsJam, you'll become a more profitable sports bettor using strategies similar to those employed by successful investors and traders. How does it work? Well, thanks to OddsJam's arbitrage tool, which identifies discrepancies in sports betting lines across the market, this tool finds arbitrage betting opportunities and shows you situations where you can bet on both sides of an outcome, like a team to win or lose a game, for any sport: basketball, baseball, football, hockey. But that's not all. OddsJam also offers a positive EV calculator to help you optimize your bet sizes and a bet tracker to monitor your profits across all your sportsbook accounts. By using OddsJam, you'll bet smarter and more responsibly, leading to long-term profitability. Plus, they're so confident in their product that they are offering you a 7-day free trial. You ready to try it out? Use the code AM1 for a 35% discount on your first month. Link to the code and the site can be found in the description if you are interested. Now, back in 2021, when the Hawks made the Eastern Conference Finals in a shocking series win over the Philadelphia 76ers in Game 7 on the Sixers home court, the thought then for the Hawks and their front office was, we're almost there. We've got a young, budding superstar in Trae Young who hasn't even entered his prime yet, and we're already in the Eastern Conference Finals. We're right there. We just need to keep building around Trae to get us a title. And I've talked about this before in a prior video, but the Hawks making the conference finals that year was actually the worst thing that could have happened to them, because it gave them this false sense of being able to compete for a title. And they would continue to double down on that fact by making these all-in tight moves when the team started sliding in the following seasons. The Hawks would go from being in the Eastern Conference Finals to finishing 9th in the East the following year, squeaking into the playoffs by way of the play-in before getting bounced in the first round. They would trade for Dejounte Murray, moving 3 first-round picks to land him, but yet again, a play-in team that would see a first-round exit in that first season with him. And then, of course, last season, even more disappointing, missing the playoffs entirely. And so for the Hawks, I'm sure they're now realizing, okay, we tried. We tried to push for a title. It didn't work. Let's tear this down and start over. The problem there, though, is they actually can't just tear it down, tank, and be bad for a while and build through the draft, because that actually helps another team more so than it does for them. That team being the San Antonio Spurs. Like I mentioned, the Hawks, when they traded for Dejounte Murray, he was coming off his first All-Star selection, a young star in his prime, and the Spurs, while they knew Murray likely didn't fit their overall timeline in a rebuild, they also weren't going to let him go for nothing. And so the Hawks, in order to propose an offer that the Spurs couldn't refuse, they threw 3 first-round picks in the deal, 23, 25, and 27, and a 26 pick swap in exchange for Dejounte Murray. Now, the pick in 2023, that was actually owed to the Hornets and did not convey with the protections on that pick. But for the 2 upcoming picks still owed to the Spurs in 25 and in 27, those are unprotected. And then the pick swap in 2026, the Spurs can elect to swap the pick with the Hawks if it's more favorable than their own, which you would have to assume if the Hawks go down a rebuilding route and the Spurs continue to build with Wembanyama, the Hawks pick most likely is going to be higher, and they would have to swap that pick with the Spurs in that draft. And so if you're the Atlanta Hawks, knowing that you don't have control of your own draft picks for the next 3 years, knowing that if you go down the rebuilding route, you could very well be sending the Spurs top lottery picks year after year, picks that could have been yours. And while yes, if you move Trae Young and Dejounte Murray, you'll be able to recoup some draft capital in these trade packages, but you won't be able to control those picks. Those picks will be determined on the team's performance that you traded with, which presumably would be contending teams if they're giving up first round draft picks to bring in win now type players, which would mean those picks are likely going to be late first rounders. And so this notion that the Hawks can just quickly pivot, blow it up, and trade Dejounte Murray and Trae Young and build through the number 1 pick is inherently flawed when they're not going to easily be able to build through the draft like a typical tanking strategy in which you hope to acquire multiple top lottery picks over a span of 2 or 3 years. The Hawks wouldn't have that luxury in this instance. They are more or less forced to continue to try and compete now. Doesn't mean they should keep their current roster, that would be insanity, but making transactions that would round out their overall lineup and overall talent pool to position themselves to be able to better compete now. That said, there is one avenue for which the Hawks could trade both Trae Young and Dejounte Murray where it makes sense for them to go down a rebuilding route. And yes, that would be engaging yet again with the Spurs in another trade deal. One that would have the Spurs send back to the Hawks their picks, giving the Hawks control again of their future where they could go through a rebuilding process and have the benefit of landing in the top 4 again and actually being able to keep that pick. Now, whether it means trading Trae Young to the Spurs or Dejounte Murray back to the Spurs, who knows? But either of those players, given their skill set, the level of players they will command first round picks in a trade deal. I don't think it would be 3, and it still boggles my mind that the Hawks gave up 3 first-round picks to add another point guard to Trae Young, but I digress. But if you're the Hawks and you're able to even get 1 or 2 of those picks back, then we're talking. And you can go down a path of rebuilding that makes sense. But also, that's going to be a tough pill to swallow if you're the Hawks, to come crawling back to the Spurs and asking for your picks, even sending them the player that you had initially traded for and getting less in return for him. Now, I personally don't like Trae Young and the fit in San Antonio. I don't like it at all. Yes, you're giving Wemby one of the better passers in the game, one of the better scorers in the league, to take some of the burden, offensive burden off of Victor Wembanyama so he can focus more on what he does best in defense. But taking his contract, meaning Trae Young, taking more opportunity away from Wemby, with Trae being so ball dominant and a liability on defense, I personally don't like it. I think if you're the Spurs, you can find better options to put talent around Wemby, and Trae Young isn't one of them. Ironically, I actually do like Dejounte Murray's fit alongside Wemby, because Murray is a great floor general when given that role, works well in the pick and roll, is a bit more selfless than Trae Young and not needing to be a number 1 option, and unlike Trae Young, he wouldn't be a traffic cone on defense and can actually help the Spurs up their overall defensive rating with the interior lockdown defender Wemby is, and Murray being a solid defender on the perimeter. But look, the other thing I'll say as it relates to the Hawks blowing it up and trading Murray and Trae and starting fresh with this year's number 1 pick, even regardless of what I just mentioned and it not making sense when the Hawks don't control their own picks for the next 3 years, is that this isn't the draft class. This isn't the number 1 pick that you build around. You're not going to build a franchise around Alex Sarr. This isn't the kind of draft where you're landing a potential franchise-changing player. I'm sure Sarr is going to be great. I like his skill, has a lot of talent with upside, but this isn't Wemby or Anthony Edwards or Paolo Banchero or Zion. This isn't the type of draft where if you land the number 1 pick, you're more or less guaranteed a future star. And so going down this route of building around this upcoming number 1 pick, trading their players, their best players for future assets, putting themselves in a position where they're going to be bad for a while they develop their young players and then send lottery picks to the Spurs during this rebuilding process, just is not smart. Not a chance the Hawks do this where they tear everything down and start over and try and build through a weak draft class. I'd like to think that their front office is a little more competent than that. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.